Hey there, internet friends, and welcome to That D Plus Show. Class is in session for the only show from that nerdy site that lets you know what kind of quality to expect right from the name. I'm your host, Trevor Starkey, and each week we dive into a different Disney Plus offering and discuss its history, how it holds up today, and our general impressions of the thing. If you like the show, please subscribe, rate, review, share the podcast with your friends, all that fun stuff. It's a solo episode this week here, and as I did before, when a similar situation came up, I'm going to be talking about Behind the Attraction today on Disney Plus. A few months back, I did a Behind the Attraction episode as a solo episode because I was, in fact, at Disneyland the day that that episode aired. And this week, I'm recording this ahead of time because in a few hours, I'm going to go pick up Logan from the airport. Frank flew in last night. Cameron's already here, obviously. And then the four of us are road tripping it off to Disneyland for a couple days this week. So I figured, hey, it's a fitting enough time to sit down and do a little bit more behind the attraction. So this is basically our behind the attraction part 2 episode. It's going to be looking at the Twilight Zone Tower of Terror ride, the Space Mountain ride, and the castles over at Disney. Yeah, it's basically I picked it because we're going to be in Disneyland, and so it seemed a fitting, appropriate choice. A little bit of the history lesson. If you missed the last time we talked about this, this series was originally released July 21st, 2021 is when the first 5 episodes came out. So basically everything up through the Space Mountain episode, because the first few episodes I covered in the prior the prior episode of Behind the Attraction here on That D Plus Show. And then the rest of the episodes 6 through 10, came out August 25th. Other releases of the time, you had Black Widow came out in July. You had the Loki finale in July of last year. Turner and Hooch came out July 21st. High School Musical, the series. I was like, How I Met Your Mother. What? No, it's just because I have all of the initials there in the doc. And yeah, High School Musical, the series, season 2 finale came out end of July last year. Jungle Cruise came out July 30th. What If started on August 11th. The Bad Batch finale came out August 13th. Diary of a Future President season 2 started in mid-August. And and then the Disney Gallery of The Mandalorian making of season 2 finale came out sometime around that time too. I don't have the date in here for some reason. Anyway, the runtime of these episodes, pretty much about 40 minutes apiece, a little bit over 40. And in the Disney Plus docu-series timeline of things, you had Secrets of Wales came out in April of 2021. Then you had Behind the Attraction. Then you had Growing Up Animal came out in August of 2021. Among the Stars came out in October. The Beatles Get Back, which I know Logan has been a fan of, started coming out in November of last year. And the Will Smith Will Smith National Geographic, series, Welcome to Earth, came out in December of 2021. The roll call of this documentary series are always a little weird, but Brian Volk-Weiss is the director of the series. He's done a lot of documentary stuff as well as a lot of comedy specials going back to 2017, including collaborations with Kevin Smith, Joel McHale, Lavelle Crawford, and Larry the Cable Guy. He is also the director of the Toys That Made Us and the Movies That Made Us series. Which is very much, in fitting with this series. It very much has that kind of cadence to the documentary style where, there's a narrator that's kind of like, they've cut together a lot of the conversations they had to have a very like constantly going flow of the conversation here, with the narrator kind of like filling in the blocks or throwing in jokes and questions and stuff like that here and there. Speaking of the narrator, it is Paget Brewster as the narrator. She's been in Criminal Minds. She was one of the late season Community cast members for the series Community, and most recently she was in DuckTales on Disney Plus slash the Disney Channel. The DuckTales reboot. She played the mother Della Duck of Huey, Dewey, and Louie. And then of course, as this is a Disneyland, Disney World kind of behind the scenes thing, it is also rife with Imagineers across the Disney Imagineer landscape. So, diving into some of the trivia that was, fun to identify and kind of pull from these episodes. In the Tower of Terror episode, they talk about the idea of, when they were originally crafting the elevator, they wanted you to have that kind of like free fall elevator, feel. And they did that. They tested that, and they were like, it doesn't feel right. It needs to go faster. So what they end up actually doing is to give the audience the feeling of free fall. Is they actually had to design the car to pull down faster than the acceleration of gravity. So when you're falling in the Tower of Terror ride, or now Guardians Galaxy Mission Breakout, the car is actually being pulled down faster than gravity would pull if it was an actual proper free fall kind of ride. So love that. The building in Florida, and I believe potentially also the building in California Adventure, although they may have not done this with California Adventure. I don't know. But the ride building in Florida is specifically 199 feet at 11 inches and change, but does not reach 200 feet in height, because they wanted specifically to avoid any internationally, any building 200 feet or taller is required to have the red blinking lights that you see, for air travel purposes and whatnot. So planes at night can see, where the ground is, where the buildings are. And so they specifically didn't want that like ruining the aesthetic of this 1930s hotel facade that they were going for. So they, and I, as somebody who, when I was doing theater years and years ago, doing technical theater specifically, I remember there was like an OSHA requirement of like any platform 6 feet or taller needed to have like handrails built into it. And so I specifically like designed a set one for one of my shows to be like 5'11" and like 7/8 of an inch or something like that. So it was just shy of the like OSHA requirement of needing that handrail, because it would have completely messed up like the look of the set. And it was a very small kind of thing anyway. But yeah, so I appreciate like fudging the numbers to kind of bypass some of that stuff. Tokyo Disney Sea, however, had no connection with the Twilight Zone. Obviously a very Western-centric show. So Imagineers had to come up with a variation on the story that centered around this like world traveler explorer character named Harrison Hightower, and the notable Imagineer Joe Rohde, who's pops up in a lot of these things, both like this and the Imagineering story and stuff like that. He was largely kind of the big driving force behind the Animal Kingdom park in general. He basically got asked to be a model for this fictional character that they're going to kind of center the Tokyo Disney Sea ride around. And it was originally going to just be like one little bust kind of in a on the design of the thing, and then it blew up into a whole bunch of other things. They ended up doing commercials for the character and whatnot. So that was funny. And then also he ends up being brought in to do the kind of the reskin in California Adventure of the ride for when they were going to turn it into, they basically were like, we want to turn it into something else by Memorial Day of 2017. And they didn't know necessarily what at the time or whatever. He kind of landed on with the partner that he was working with on it. They landed on Guardians of the Galaxy, and he's doing this all while he's preparing to launch the Avatar ride at the same time in Disney World. So yeah. And they basically they managed to, like, Guardians of the Galaxy was popular. They were filming and getting ready to release the second volume, Guardians of Galaxy Volume 2. So they were able to kind of like double up on like shooting and using the actors for that for the ride. Um, and yeah, they basically were able to just kind of like throw up a new facade on the ride and throw up kind of new decorations and everything on the inside, of course, once they kind of came up with the story of Tavon the Collector's like collection. And then they did need to they didn't have time to change like the guts and the inner mechanics of the ride, but they needed to figure out a way with Tower of Terror. They kind of talk about the idea that like the screams in Tower of Terror are like for fear and horror, and they needed the screams of Guardians of the Galaxy to be like comedy and joyous and whatnot. And so what they ended up doing was they basically like kept the mechanics of the ride entirely the same, but they shifted basically the trajectory of the ups and downs of the elevator, the lift, to give a little more like hang time, free fall hang time kind of stuff, to make it more joyous and fun and enjoyable. And so that's how they landed on kind of the new version of Tower of Terror. But obviously the original is still out there in Disney World. I, as somebody who's only ever been to Disneyland, was not aware of like the going into the fifth dimension-ness of the ride. Where in Disney World, like the cart is actually like you go back, you lift up, and then you actually like move into another area to kind of do the free fall stuff. Because in California Adventure, it's basically you kind of back up, you go up, and then you're just doing everything kind of on that same plane. So it was like, oh, okay. I didn't realize they had like that much more space in the Disney World version, but of course it's kind of a recurring theme of these episodes is like, hey, Disney World has like a ton more space, so everything's more spread out and there's more room for everything compared to everything being like really squished into the Disneyland California Adventure spacing of Anaheim. So diving over to the next episode of Space Mountain, they kind of touch on how this was the first major expansion in the Disney World park, was adding Space Mountain into it. It was a thrill ride that they needed to do completely in the dark, or they decided to do completely in the dark, obviously. And they make it a point of like repeatedly not saying roller coaster. And I don't necessarily know the rationale behind that. They don't really get into it. It's just kind of they make it a recurring little bit of not roller coaster, thrill ride, and stuff like that. So whatever. As I kind of alluded to just a minute ago, when they decided to kind of take Space Mountain and bring it to Disneyland, they did not have the space for it, so they had to modify it. Disney World is a kind of a single single passenger line of cars, a la like I think of it as the Splash Mountain, but I think in Disney World Splash Mountain is actually a two-seater. But so Disney World Space Mountain is a single line of cars, one person like in front of the other, and they have two tracks that kind of go in I think opposite directions throughout the ride. They didn't have the space for that in Disneyland, so it's one single track, but the cars are two people wide. So they were able to basically fit in just as many people on Space Mountain going through the ride every day, with basically I think they said the diameter of the dome in Disney World is 300 feet, and the diameter in Disneyland is only 200 feet. So they're able to basically like shrink everything down, only do one track, but make it a double wide track and get just as many people in there. Routinely one of the most popular attractions for many, many years over there. And then when they decided to kind of figure out what they wanted to do for Disneyland Paris / Euro Disney, they landed on the idea of like, well, we don't like Tomorrowland isn't really what they were looking for that. So they do like the innovators and whatnot, and they decided to kind of structure that Space Mountain based off of the works of Jules Verne. So it's like a shot to the moon kind of thing, but with like old timey tech or whatever. When they added that in, they also added it was one. It was the first loop de loops in any Disney thrill ride. And then it also was the first instance of onboard audio, which is like fascinating to me because like I having gone so many times in recent years, I completely forget that like when I was going as a kid, I was not hearing, something right behind my head on that ride or something like that. But they did take that idea back to Disneyland, kind of did it there for a little while. And it was they had kind of a like a surfer rock vibe going for a few years, to fit kind of the aesthetic um, of what they were going for with like psychedelic space stuff. And then eventually, after The Incredibles, Michael Giacchino, who's out there doing a ton of stuff these days, in the Marvel universe and beyond. He basically did an updated version of the music, and that's the music that you will hear if you go on Space Mountain in Disneyland today. So you're hearing kind of his vibes of it, and I did not know that. I did not know that it was Michael Giacchino doing that. They talk about the Ghost Galaxy and Hyperspace Mountain variants that they started kind of creating, with Ghost Galaxy starting at Hong Kong Disneyland, or Disney Hong Kong, and then they kind of like brought those projections over and then used those projections very much to kind of be like, hey, and we can do the same thing for Star Wars and Hyperspace Mountain. And then when they got to Shanghai Disney, they decided to kind of forego Space Mountain altogether and instead looked at the Tron light cycles, which was that was going to be their big thrill ride in the Tomorrowland version over there. With people kind of shooting out of the mountain and then going back through, on the Tron light cycles. And it much like the Space Mountain kind of vibes before it, one of the most popular things, and is currently being kind of retrofitted and brought to Disney World, because again, they have so much space there. Don't think I'll ever get to see the light cycles in Disneyland unless they decide to, like, I don't know, finally do something with like the People Mover tracks or something and kind of like repurpose those. But probably not going to happen anytime soon. So last episode of this episode of That D Plus show that I'm going to talk about is the episode 6, talking about the castles. Castles are one of many weenies that Walt Disney kind of decided to populate the parks with, and weenies in this terminology are it's kind of a like he used hot dogs weenies to like to basically lure his dog, apparently. And the idea of weenies in theme park management is a thing on the horizon for your eye to immediately be caught and like a path for you to go on. So the castles are typically the central weenie of the park, but then each of the lands will typically have their own, like Frontierland at Disneyland has like the Big Thunder Mountain Railroad. Adventureland has Splash Mountain or the Haunted Mansion, stuff like that. Tomorrowland has Space Mountain. So those kinds of like elements of, hey, that's the thing that you can see from far away that will like lure you and say like, oh, I want to go see more of that. And that largely starts with the castles. That's the thing that you can see from pretty much, a lot of the other areas of the park. Especially in some of the later parks where the castles get much, much bigger. But yeah, it's kind of the like, here's the first thing you're going to see after you kind of walk through the gates and you're like walking down Main Street. There's the castle at the end of everything that that is drawing your attention, pulling you in. First introduction of castles in the Disney park design was included in a Herb Ryman drawing for a 1953 financing pitch. Always love kind of that, like, super behind the scenes stuff. They decided to use the castle design that they were working on for Sleeping Beauty for the very first Disneyland park. Despite the fact Disneyland came out in 1990 or 1955, or Disneyland like launched, opened its doors in 1955, but Sleeping Beauty was not going to come out until 1959. So they're just like that far ahead and working through the animation ideas and stuff like that. and it was kind of used as like a, oh, and we can use that to sell the next movie that we have kind of coming down the line. Um, the castle, much like a lot of elements of Disneyland in particular, is used with a significant focus on forced perspective. It is in total only 77 feet tall, and they kind of build it so that like the first floor is like built proper height, and then like every floor behind that is built like smaller and smaller, more miniature stuff, so that like the top pillars and towers and turrets of the ride, or of not the ride, of the castle, are like significantly smaller by comparison. Another example they kind of point out is in Pirates of the Caribbean, like the main marketplace set floor is like actual height, but if you go like back further and further, like the houses in the back or whatever like will only go up to your knee. It's kind of how they they talk about that kind of stuff. So always fun seeing those kinds of like behind the scenes elements. Disney World, on the other hand, when that one opened, they decided to go with Cinderella's castle instead of Sleeping Beauty's. It is significantly taller because they had more space to work with on that one. So that one is 189 feet tall, and has a very deluxe, exclusive, invite only Cinderella's castle suite. I believe for the resort hotel there, which I imagine is where like significant dignitaries or whatever, or giant crazy celebrities get to stay, is in the Disney suite, or the Cinderella's castle suite. Tokyo Disney got a duplicate of Cinderella's castle, just basically lifted wholesale from Disney World. Euro Disney / Disneyland Paris eventually got a Sleeping Beauty variant, but they kind of went all out with this, and did some cool, crazy, like, because they're building it in Paris, surrounded by actual real life castles. They kind of had a lot of people that they could kind of lean on for the craftsman work, including a stained glass master craftsman who came out of retirement to work on construction of that castle in Paris, which is really cool when you get to see like the stained glass that's basically like classic Disney animation, but in stained glass form, kind of telling a lot of these like iconic princess stories of the day. Disneyland Hong Kong went with the Anaheim Castle, kind of basically lifted wholesale, but they did switch up the orientation for it, to be more in fitting with the feng shui mentality of the Chinese kind of marketplace out there. In particular, they talk about how typically the castles are oriented where they're facing south, so that people taking pictures in front of the castles are always getting like a good view. There's never any shade from any kind of surrounding anything. And for Disneyland Hong Kong, they were they turned the castle to face it east, I believe. Yeah. And so it's got like the mountain hillside kind of in its horizon behind it. And it probably didn't take the best pictures, well, actually, I guess at night it's taking, pretty good pictures because it's lit up. So they don't care about the backlight of the sun or whatever. But yeah, so I thought that was a cool little fun fact. And then Shanghai Disney just went basically all out on their castle. It is an enormous beast, that like in kind of the kayfabe idea of the castles is the one that houses all of the princesses, which is why it is so big and ginormous. Rides go through it. There's character meet and greets within it. And yeah, I think there's like a full restaurant in there as well, I think they talked about. So yeah, the Shanghai one, giant beast of a castle, because they had the space and the money to do it, and they wanted to do something special for the billion plus people over there in China for that one. And then the last thing they kind of touch on there is that they, after doing the Shanghai one, decided they wanted to kind of end up giving the Disneyland Hong Kong a its own identity, rather than just being the Sleeping Beauty's castle from Anaheim, lifted wholesale. So they kind of looked back at some original designs and stuff of Walt's and saw kind of the, his dream, had he had more time and money, of kind of like an expansion. And they kind of worked around that, and they built around that expansion. And I forget the woman's name, but she talks about kind of going into Bob Iger for a pitch on this, and saying like she wanted to be a very, very vibrant, colorful castle, that incorporated basically like the colors of every Disney princess and heroine kind of character, and Bob Iger loved the idea, and so that one is much more colorful, and potentially like contrasting colors and stuff than all of the other castles, which all the other castles have some kind of like rooted in a realism base maybe, and then you get into like the colorful fantasy of the the pillars and tiers and stuff like that. But so yeah, that is these 3 episodes of Behind the Attraction over on Disney Plus. I'm a sucker for these kinds of like behind the scenes stories, even if, as I think I've said before, I'm not the biggest fan of this documentary style, where the documentary is trying to like, it's not just letting the stories tell themselves, or it's not just letting the subjects tell the story. It's trying to get in there and create like its own little, like, I'm gonna throw in quips and jokes and stuff like that, and I'm gonna take people's things out of context because it's gonna tell a joke or something here. I'm not a huge fan of that, but the stories that they do tell are always engaging, and I'm a sucker for this kind of stuff. So since I will be in Anaheim with my buddies, enjoying it this week, I figured it was another fitting opportunity to sit down and talk about Behind the Attraction here. Report card, as I think I usually give these things, a solid A. Again, I'm a sucker for this kind of stuff. It's right in my wheelhouse. So I look forward to seeing this and then sharing some of these dumb fun facts with my friends this week. Extra credit if you like this. There is The Imagineering Story. There is Disney Insider, Magic of Disney's Animal Kingdom, One Day at Disney, One Day at Disney Shorts, Disney's Fairy Tale Weddings Special, Disney's Disney Parks Sunrise series, and Decorating Disney Holiday Magic. Extracurriculars, what else are we watching on Disney Plus? I am keeping up with Book of Boba Fett. Logan and I talked about that a couple weeks ago. I'm recording this before the 3rd episode has come out this week, but the first couple episodes I think I mentioned with Cam last week, a little slow going for my taste, but I'm still on board to check out and see kind of the rest of the series as it plays out. Also I watched Encanto a number more times after we recorded last week's episode. But yeah, that is going to do it for this week's episode of That D Plus Show. Thank you for joining me to listen to me talk about Behind the Attraction over there on Disney Plus. You can follow me at Trevor J. Starkey. In addition to that, I will encourage people to go check out all of our Game of the Year stuff that we had start coming up this week. You can go check out our big epic Game of the Year 4.5 hour thing. If you want to hear kind of each of us go through our top 10 games of the year, or if you want to just skip ahead to kind of the end of that episode, where we kind of tally all the rankings and stuff and come up with our collective top 10 games of 2021 for That Nerdy Site. So you can go check that out over at thatnerdysite.com. If you liked what you heard, once again, please rate, review, like, subscribe, share the podcast with your friends, all that fun stuff. Thank you for joining me. As always, stay nerdy and be good to each other. Class dismissed.